Good morning, everybody. What's up, y'all? This is Dr. Dixon, and welcome back. This is video one of the prompt engineering course, and today we're going to talk about core prompting principles, how we're going to effectively write prompts. And so, what we'll discuss is how to, make sure we have clarity and context, which can really make or break your actual prompt or your result, rather. And we'll actually practice forming instructions that AI bots can understand readily and give you, the results that you actually desire. So, side note, there are key terms that I discussed in the previous video that I uploaded on Tuesday. You can check out the entire video in its entirety on my YouTube, which is linked in the bio above. So, the first thing we want to do is remember what prompt engineering, which is that art and science of crafting an actual prompt to get your desired output. And so, what we're going to learn today is how to do that at a basic level. So, today you can think of today's lessons as the grammar of language, or the grammar of talking to AI, the do's and don'ts of it, right? So, what can you do? What should you do? What should you not do when you're giving instructions or prompts to these bots? So the first core concept we're going to speak about is clarity. Now, clarity is very key, when it comes down to prompt engineering. AI bots cannot ask clarifying questions unless you prompt them to do so, which we may get into later. The idea is it will take that prompt literally, as if, whatever you put inside of it is literally going to take that prompt literally. So if you give it an ambiguous prompt, it's going to give you an ambiguous response. So the more clear you are with your prompt, the clearer of a response you're going to get, and we're going to discuss how you can do that now. So the first thing when it comes down to clarity is to be specific. If you give a vague prompt, it's going to give you a vague answer. For example, let's take the actual prompt and we're going to give it, tell me about bats. Well, that AI bot will be very confused because it would not know if you're talking about baseball bats or if you're talking about the animal bat. So you want to make sure you're quite specific about what you are looking for. So let's say you are in a science course and you are looking for, bats, the actual animal. Well, maybe an input prompt would be, uh, tell me about the nocturnal habitats of the bat animal, or something around that nature, which is a clear, specific type of direction you are giving the actual bot. So in the prompt, you want to make sure you are very specific. The next key thing you need to consider when you're dealing with clarity is to be direct. Don't shy away from being direct to the bot. The idea is for you to get what it is that you want. So if you want a list of something, make sure you tell it to give you a list. If you want a summary, you want to make sure you say summarize. Those are key things that you need to make sure you also give it. Is clear directions of what you want. So, what you want is what you will get. But if you don't tell it what you want, you will not get the desired output. So, you have to make sure you are direct. Also, the last thing you want to do to make sure there is some type of clarity for the bot in your prompt is to avoid open ended ambiguity. So instead of doing things or saying phrases like something about or maybe discuss something, right? Those are very ineffective ways to speak to the bot. So, for example, instead of saying, given a prompt like, can you maybe discuss something about climate change effects? That will be that's very ambiguous on what it is that you actually want, right? So maybe you can attune that prompt to say, explain three major effects of climate change on coastal cities. Now you are specific, you are direct, and you have avoided the scope of what it is the bot needs to look for. So it exactly knows to give you three effects and focus on coastal cities and also focus on climate change. So that's the idea of being clear with your actual prompt, or in your prompt rather. So I often tell my students when it comes down to talking to the bot, phrase their prompt as if they're talking to a friend that is very literal, or a person that is very literal. How would you provide instructions or directions to that person for them to interpret? That's how you should think of how you should be creating your prompt when it comes down to utilizing AI bots. All right, next up is context. And so, what do I mean when I say context? That's any information that you can provide that will frame the question properly. Like, who is your audience? What role should the AI play, if any, right? Specific data that is clean, where you're not giving out any, personal data, whatever the case may be. Remember, check your data privacy and policy and guidelines, but providing the relevant data that, if you can, to the bot, specific facts, etc. Those are things what I mean. Context. AI bots do not hold memory for certain ones. Now, shout out to the, large language models that have developed that. It is beautiful. I love it. So, but everyone's not privileged to that type of subscription. So you want to make sure that you understand it does not have persistent memory of everything that you give it. And so you want to make sure that you paint the world in that particular situation that you are looking to get as the output. You want to provide what's been said in earlier conversations, if you're looking for email response, those type things. So let's say you actually want to provide a certain perspective. What you need to do is you actually need to establish a role or scenario. This is something that we call role prompting, which we'll go over in detail later on. So, for example, you want to give a prompt that says, act as an history teacher and explain the causes of the American Revolutionary War. Now, you're actually stating and giving the model of the context and the style and the depth of answer that is expected of the actual bot. So it will now provide an educational environment that provides detailed and clear explanations. So let's say that your question or your response depends on prior information. You want to include that information. For example, instead of just asking what are some improvements, you need to actually provide context on what you're trying to improve. So for example, you should say, given the draft text below, what are some improvements one can make on the syllabus? And then you include the draft text of your actual syllabus. That is then embedding the necessary information in the prompt that you already have, and it can now construct the style and context or the story that is needed for the response. Now, my favorite is setting the scene. If you want a creative response, you might provide a brief background of what it is that you want to be creative about. I do this all the time. So this is where it gets a little fun. You might give it a prompt like, imagine you are in a world where robots and humans coexist. Write a short story from a robot's perspective about daily life. Like, who would have thought to this is a way that English people can, well, not people, but English instructors or humanities, anyone really, because I use it all the time when I'm pulling different ideas from various places of studies, to see exactly what we can pull together, because that's how you can potentially unlock that other 10, 90 about percent of the brain. It's connecting things that we probably would have never thought to connect, which is quite interesting. So you're providing a context of the environment. Now, it doesn't have to be that, abstract. You can say, I'm in a doctor's office that provides care for patients with PTSD, right? Like you can set the scene in any way you choose fit, but get creative with it as well. Now, I actually want to emphasize this. AI models are very context hungry. So you want to, if you want them to perform as best as it's possible when it comes down to your response, you want to supply them with as much relevant detail and information that you actually currently have. Part of this is figuring out what information the model actually needs to produce the answer you want. And then you're going to give it to the actual bot model and the prompt, which will then produce what you actually potentially or really want for the particular environment that you're located in. All right, now that we've covered clarity and context, it's time to talk about instructions. A prompt can be phrased as an instruction or a question or a mix of both. And the wording you choose can influence the outcome significantly of what comes out as a result of these AI bots. Now, the question is, how do you write instructions to give to this bot? You want to be very explicit with what it is that you want. For example, what I found to be effective as far as outputs are concerned are to start with verbs as to what you want the actual bot to give you. For example, list the, explain how, compute the, compare X, Y, and Z. These are all keywords to the AI bot that tells it what the user is expecting. So that's what it is. That is what it's going to tune to give you. Let's take an example. Like we could list the 3 benefits of conserving solar energy. The model at that point knows that you want to know what 3 things are benefits, and it will give it to you in a list. So now we get on the topic of questions. You want to be very specific and direct with what it is that you're looking for. For example, if you're looking for something to be explanatory and you want to talk about the sky colors, right? You want to maybe ask a specific question that says something as, why does the sky change color at sunset? Don't ask a question like sky color at sunset because it's very vague. First off, it's not even a question, right? So the clearer the actual question, the more specific the actual question, the better your outcome is going to be. Now, for those that actually already know the basics of prompt engineering, this isn't really something for you, but it does matter in some retrospect because it could potentially develop your prompt a little bit more. But the idea is to give one prompt and one task, especially early on when you're starting. You don't want to muddy the waters of your prompt, which will give you some random or crazy output. So you want to make sure you actually stay with the idea of one prompt, one task. So let's look at an example, right? Let's say you're a science teacher and you want to explore, literary works, right? And so you want the students to actually do a play based on DNA and genetics, but you first want them to learn about DNA, right? So an example prompt that you may give it is explain DNA and create a play about genetics. That is a nice prompt because you have given it explicit instructions and you've also told it what you expect as an output. That is a great prompt, but the idea is what the output is going to look like. It might be confusing. It may first just tell you what DNA is, and then it may create a play about genetics, and they're not included together, but maybe it's going to intertwine it. Like, you never know what the output is. So you want to make sure you give it one prompt at a time. So you could start off with the statement like, explain DNA to my biology students. And then you get that output. And once you get that output, you can follow that up with, now create a play in the style of Shakespeare about genetics and DNA. Then it will give you that actual play. So that idea of keeping one prompt with one task is something you would like to initially start with. Now, as I said, if you've already gotten the handle of one prompt, one task, there are ways that you can cleverly combine all of this to actually get that output that you want, which we'll discuss in more advanced prompt engineering topics. interesting tidbit when it comes down to the tone that you give it, whether it's imperative or conversational. The factual information is not different, it's pretty much the same, but how it responds to you will probably be the type of tone you give it. So it's interesting based on the machine exactly how you actually, you know, structure that prompt. The tone is going to probably reflect how you actually structure that prompt. You know, you could be as nice and polite to it, so the response is going to be very nice and polite to you in response. You might even get some emojis, but you can also be very mean, stern to it, and so its output is going to be kind of mean and stern back. So it's a very interesting thing. I suggest you play around with it, but at the end of the day, the factual content is still the same. So, to sum up this video series, there are really three major key takeaways. The first one is to make sure you write clear and specific prompts. The more you articulate your request, the better the bot will fulfill it. The second one is to always consider what context the bot needs and include it inside of the prompt. Don't assume the bot knows anything you have not told it outside of the general knowledge that it has been trained on. And you want to make sure that that is as up to date as you need it for what it is that you want to speak about or, you know, inquire about. And the third thing, sorry, is to use direct instructions or questions to guide the bot's response, format, and focus that you want specifically of the bot. So those are the three major takeaways for all of what we just discussed when it comes down to the core concepts or the core prompting concepts that you will utilize in order for you to get some type of solid foundation with your basic prompts. Now, I'm not lost upon it that some people are visual learners, and so therefore, I'm actually going to be going live on Sunday at 7 p.m. on my YouTube channel. The link is in my bio above. So at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'll actually be going live and I'll go over some example prompts. I'll go over various ways that you can construct a prompt. We'll go over real life scenarios, and I'll actually answer and give ideas to prompts that you specifically need after I go over some examples and share some ideas of how you could utilize these prompts in real time. Now, remember, I am using ChatGPT Plus, so my prompts might come out a little bit different because I do have a paid subscription. But again, this is not sponsored by them. It's just that that's the generative AI bot that I choose to use when it comes down to output of textual data that I like. So check me out on Sunday, subscribe, follow, do whatever it is that you would like, set up a notification. I don't, I'm new to this whole, social media thing. So forgive me if the live starts off a little bit sketchy, but I'm definitely here to make sure that everybody learns and understands these type of AI models. And this is just one type of generative AI bot. So we're focusing on prompt engineering for actual documents or natural language documents that you would prefer. So that's the idea. Subscribe, join me on Sunday evening at 7 o'clock on YouTube. And if so, I'll see you there. Peace.